A mixed-use property is a definition that HMRC apply to properties for stamp duty land tax, or SDLT for short purposes. HMRC define properties as either residential or non-residential. A property that's mixed use contains elements of both, so there will be a residential property but also some commercial property, and if a property is mixed use then the SDLT is charged at a commercial rate. A property that's mixed use must have some commercial element to it. This could be units that are let out, it could be farmland, it could even be forestry. It very much depends on the circumstances of every property. Some properties are very obviously have a commercial element and a mixed use, and others are a little bit more borderline and may need to be looked at more closely. It can make a large difference the amount of SDLT actually paid, depending on what the property is and the value of it, as SDLT is charged in a tiered system with the rates increasing as the value of the property increases. More valuable the property gets, if it is defined as mixed use, even if it contains quite a large and valuable house, means that the SDLT paid can be tens of thousands of pounds less than if it was a purely residential property. For example, if you're purchasing a farmhouse at say £2.5 million, on current SDLT rates, depending on whether the purchaser is liable for the supplemental SDLT if they own other property, then the difference between the property being classed as a residential property or a non-residential property could be as much as £100,000 in SDLT payment. Although SDLT is paid by a buyer, it's not just a buyer's issue. As a seller of a property, particularly if you're selling a farm in lots, then you might want to consider how you can structure those lots to make certain that all of the acquisitions will be classified as either mixed use or commercial, because this could potentially increase the price of the property as the buyer may be paying less in stamp duty on their acquisition. If you're thinking of buying a property that could have a mixed-use classification, so it has some element of commercial property within it, you really ought to consider the SDLT position very early in the transaction. It's even possible on some purchases to include what is very clearly commercial property to be absolutely certain that the property will then be classified as mixed use. For some properties it's not so clear cut, and in those situations taking advice from an accountant or a tax barrister may be needed. In summary, SDLT is a complicated issue on a property purchase, and whether you're a buyer or a seller, you should always take advice on SDLT as early as possible in the transaction to make sure you're paying the right amount of SDLT and not paying any more than you need to.